This video explains the entries you need to make in order to value a defined benefit pension plan in family law software. The first thing to know is that the valuation in family law software is actuarially completely accurate. That is, if the entries you make into family law software match the entries that you would give to an outside pension valuation firm, the result you get from family law software will be the same as the result you would get from an outside valuation firm. The second thing to know is that it is in most cases fairly easy and straightforward to make the correct entries for a valuation. Let's see how it works. We click this button to add a new valuation plan, and let's say we're valuing Rain's teacher plan. So we need to enter Rain's birth date. We don't need the birth date of the other party. We do need the gender. Let's pick a gender here. We need to enter who owns the plan. We don't need to enter whose financial statement it goes on to get a valuation. We enter the valuation date. This video is being made in 2020, so we'll enter a date in 2020. We need a retirement age, and we need a monthly benefit. And with those entries, the software gives you a plan valuation. Wasn't that quick and easy? The thing to understand is that the software did that making some assumptions, and it's important to make sure that the assumptions the software made line up with the actual situation in this case. To do that, we click the three dots, More Info link, to explore the details of the plan. The More Info page is divided into several sections, and let's get an overview of those sections now. The first section, Section A, Valuation, is the place where you go to figure out what the value of the plan is. This might be the moment to talk about what is a pension plan valuation. Pension plan valuation is the best guess as to what the value of the plan will be, given the fact that payments are going to be made starting at retirement monthly for the remainder of the recipient's life. Now, we don't know what the value will be because we don't know how long the recipient will live. So we use a mortality table to guess, estimate, use an average, whatever term you want to use, to figure out how many payments will be made, and we use other factors such as the cost of living adjustment to guess what those payments will be. Now, a pension payment is similar to a bond or alimony payments in that it's a series of payments made over a period of time. The big difference between a pension payment and a bond is that we don't know exactly at the beginning how many payments there will be. But in both cases, you can calculate or estimate the value today of that series of payments, given adjustments in the payments because of the cost of living, and given the interest rate, which causes future payments to be worth less in today's dollars than present payments. So Section A calculates the value or estimates the value. And let's move on and look at the other sections. The next section, Section B, calculates each party's share of the pension. That's known as the coverture fraction or the marital portion. And essentially, that is the portion of the value to which each party is entitled under law. And essentially, this is the fraction of the pension that was earned during the marriage. The next section, Section C, is the calculation of the marital amount, which is simply the coverture fraction or marital portion multiplied by the total value. Section D, the property division, is just like the property division of any other asset. How much of the marital portion is each party going to keep? The assumption is that the plan participant will always keep his or her separate portion, although you can change that assumption if you wish. The next sections relate to how the benefit will be paid. Almost always the benefits are paid over time and not in a lump sum, but you can specify for purposes of the software's projections that the payments will be paid in a lump sum. Section F relates to data carries, where you tell the software whether you want the value to be carried to the financial affidavit and whether you want the value to be included in the net worth projections of the parties. And the last sections are information sections relating to an audit trail, which shows how the pension is calculated, and further information. All right, let's go back up to the top and look at each section in detail. Let's begin with Section A on valuation. So the pension is a series of payments, starting at a particular point, continuing for the remainder of the life of the recipient, and the payment amounts themselves may vary over time. So the factors that determine valuation are the date when the payments begin, the anticipated number of payments that will be made to the best we can calculate it, the benefit amount, the base payment amount, and the way those payments change over time. So each of the entries affects one of those factors. So the birth date and age at which the participant will retire, or date at which the participant will retire, establish the date and age that payments will begin. The date that payments will begin is important because some of the mortality projections assume that people will live longer if they are born later, or, more recently, if people will live shorter if they are born later. But the date of birth matters as well as the age. The gender matters because, on average, women tend to live longer than men. So a given pension will have a higher value if it is for a woman than if it is for a man. Next, we look at the interest rate. The higher the interest rate, the lower the pension value, because future payments will be discounted to a greater extent. The next entry is the cost of living adjustment, and this describes how much the payment increases each year for inflation. The higher the cost of living adjustment, the higher the pension value. The next entry is perhaps the most important and also the most mysterious, and that is, which mortality table should we use? A mortality table is simply a statistical table which shows, for a given population, how many people died each year from that population. Different population subsets give different mortality tables. The software will have a default mortality table, which is the one most widely in use at the current time. But several of the other tables are also widely used, and you should click the link for more information and the pop-up help to read more about each of these tables. Next, we enter the date to evaluate the plan. The earlier the date, the more the payments are discounted, so the lower the pension value will be. And then we get the pension result based on these values, and that is the value of the pension. Now, it's worth noticing that the value of the pension is completely independent of the number of years that the parties were married during the plan. The value of the plan is simply the value of those payments. The curvature calculation, or the marital portion, which is where we're going next, is the place where you determine how much of the plan each party is entitled to. And, as we said earlier, the goal there is simply to calculate the fraction of the plan that was earned during the marriage. If the parties were married before the employment began, then typically 100% of the value of the plan is marital. It's all marital, and the entire value of the plan is subject to division between the parties. If the person was employed before the marriage, then some number of those years are considered to be that person's separate property. If the person started in the plan in 1995 and was married in 2000, the person had 5 years working not during the marriage. So the curvature fraction would be less than 100%. Now let's talk about the assumption that we have made with regard to the date until which the participant works. You'll see that we have assumed so far, and most pension valuations do assume, that the participant works until the cutoff date. You typically get from the pension plan administrator a valuation as of the cutoff date, and the curvature fraction, the marital amount, is calculated based on that assumption. Courts like that assumption because it is definite. It is known that the person has worked until the cutoff date. Whereas if you were going to try to calculate the pension value and curvature fraction, assuming that the participant works until retirement, which could be 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, there's a lot of speculation, which in a court of law is not something that is welcomed. So typically the value that we've entered is the value of the pension that is accrued so far, and the cutoff date that we're using for valuing the marital portion is the current date, the date of separation. But there is another way to value a plan and calculate the marital portion, and that is to assume that the employee works until retirement and enter the value of the plan as you anticipate it will be in retirement. And then we would specify here, for purposes of the calculation of the marital portion, that the participant would work until the retirement date. What happens then is that you have typically a higher benefit amount because benefits tend to increase as the number of years in service increases, but you have a lower marital portion because a number of earning years happened after the marriage, which is outside the marital term. So you have a higher amount, but a smaller marital portion. And the net marital value can be either higher or lower, depending on the sizes of those two effects. Let's just look at an example here. In our current calculations so far, the marital amount, which is the coverture fraction or the marital portion multiplied by the pension value, is $209,000. The pension itself is $258,000. Now let's assume that if the person worked until retirement, her pension would not be $1,500 a month, but rather $2,500 a month. And let's say that we are calculating until the retirement date. Because of all those earning years after the marriage, the coverage fraction went down. Let's see that again. The coverage fraction was 81.15%, but if the benefit amount that we entered assumes that the participant works until the retirement date, there are fewer earning years during the marriage, and so the coverage fraction goes down to 48.29%. The pension value, because of the higher dollar amount of the pension, because the person is assumed to have worked until retirement, went up to $431,217. The coverture fraction went down to 48.29%, and the marital amount is $208,235. So you see we have a higher value, a lower fraction, and the marital amount depends on how those two things settle out. Let's talk about the remaining sections. The property division divides the marital amount. So if the marital amount is divided 50-50, there is still a separate amount, which is the amount that was earned outside of the marriage that is being kept entirely by the plan participant. You have an option to specify that some separate equity of the participant will be given to the other party. And that does happen on occasion. The next section, you can specify whether payments will be taken in a lump sum. This does not affect the calculation at all, but rather the software's projections. Similarly, the data carries affect the software's projections. We believe that pension value should be included as the value of an asset in the software's net worth projections. What the software does is smoothly increase the value of the pension until payments begin, and then decrease the pension as payments are made. But some planners prefer not to include the value of the pension in the net worth projections, and there's an option here not to do that. Finally, the software has some reports. The pension evaluation client report is like the report you would get from an outside valuation firm. Just describes the key factors and the pension result. And the audit trail, which is entirely unique to family law software, you will certainly not get this from an outside appraisal firm, is a detailed explanation of exactly how the pension is calculated. And you can see that what we do is we calculate what is known as an expected value of each pension payment, starting at age 67 and running through age 120. And this allows us to factor in differential interest rates and cost of living adjustments and so on, and is a much more accurate calculation than simply using a single life expectancy, which does not permit that level of detail. And then we discount back to the present, and that gives us the present value of our pension. And that concludes our video on calculating the value of a defined benefit pension in family law software. Thanks for watching.